Hello!
And welcome to Larry's Library.
Hello, we're going to try this again. Welcome to Larry's Library. We're continuing to read Swiss Family Robinson. Tonight we'll do chapters 33, Anniversary of Our Deliverance and Motives for Thankfulness, and chapter 34, Gourd Plantation. Let's see. Well, we're going to keep to see what happens here. Gourd Plantation, Monkey Root, or Ginseng Bird Snares.
Timer isn't going. No, it is.
It looks like Facebook is having trouble playing videos. So I don't know if this is working or not. So I'm probably not going to continue this, but I'm going to check this and see if it works. So if you're watching this, I'm sorry, it looks like it's not going to happen today because Facebook is having problems. I've seen Facebook have problems with a lot of videos today, apparently. So we'll I may try it one more time, see if there's anything going on. I may see if this thing shows up when I try to watch it when I'm done. But so we'll return with Swiss Family Robinson and chapters 33 and 34. Well, Kevin says it's working, but I don't see anything here. So it's not playing.
What do you mean?
Well, we will read chapter 33, Anniversary of Our Deliverance, Motives for Thankfulness. The kids want me to read it fast. One morning, having arisen earlier than the rest of my young family, One morning, having arisen earlier than the rest of my young family, I occupied myself by counting up the time that had passed away since our shipwreck. I calculated the dates with the utmost exactness, and I found that the next day would be the anniversary of that event. It was just 2 years since the hand of God had been extended over us to save us from a watery grave. I felt my mind filled with thanksgiving, and I resolved to celebrate the day with all the pomp our situation would permit. As I had not yet fixed upon the arrangements for our holiday, I said nothing about it to my family. Breakfast over, we proceeded to our different employments, and it was not until we were seated at supper that I announced in a pompous manner the holiday for the morrow. "Be ready," said I to my sons, "to celebrate the anniversary of the morrow. Let each one prepare himself as is proper for so great a day." These last words, joined to the announcement of a holiday, surprised and overjoyed my children. Their mother was not less astonished than they were to find out that they had been on the island 2 years. On the morrow we rose and dressed as decently as our scanty means afforded and proceeded to breakfast. After our daily prayer, I announced to my family that the amusements of the day would conclude with the exercises which always terminated our holidays. "You have practiced for some time," said I, "in wrestling, running, slinging, and horsemanship. The time has come when you shall receive the reward for your labors. You shall this day contend before your mother and me, and the crown shall be given to the victor. Come, champions," I added, elevating my voice, "the barrier is open. Enter the lists, and you, trumpets, sound the horn of combat." As I said these last words, I turned to the little inlet where our geese and ducks were feeding, and the whole troop, frightened by my gestures and the tone of my voice, commenced a most deafening clamor, and furnished my sons with a good joke to excite their risible faculties. I then organized the different combats which were to take place. First came firing at a mark. The materials for this were soon arranged by fixing on the ground a rudely shaped piece of wood with 2 bits of leather at each side of the top, which we called a kangaroo. Jack did wonders. Either by chance or skill, he shot away one of the ears of our pretended kangaroo. Fritz just grazed the head, and Ernest lodged his ball in the middle of the body. The 3 shots were all worthy of praise. Another proof of skill was then made. It consisted in firing at a ball of cork which I threw up in the air. Ernest had the advantage here. He cut the ball to pieces. Fritz also shot well, but Jack could not hit it. We then tried the same thing with pistols, shortening the distance, and again I complimented my boys upon the progress they had made since last year. Slinging succeeded to the pistol exercise. Fritz carried off the prize. After that came archery, and here all, even little Francis, distinguished themselves. Next came the races, and I gave them for a course the distance between Family Bridge and Falcon's Nest. The one that arrives first, said I to the runners who gathered about me, will bring me, as proof of his victory, my knife which I left on the table under the tree. I then gave the signal by clapping my hands 3 times. My 3 sons set out. Jack and Fritz, with all the impetuosity that marked their character. On the contrary, Ernest, who never did anything without reflecting, set off slowly at first, but gradually augmented his pace. I perceived that he had his elbows pressed firmly against his body, and I augured well from this little mark of prudence. The runners were absent about 3/4 of an hour. Jack returned first, but he was mounted on his buffalo, and the onagra and the ass followed him. "How now," said I, "is this what you call racing? It was your legs, and not those of the buffalo that I wish to exercise." "Bah!" cried he, jumping from the back of his courser. "I knew I would never get there, so I left the course, and as the trial of horsemanship comes next, I thought that, as I was near Falcon's Nest, I would bring our coursers back with me." Fritz came next, all out of breath and covered with sweat, but he had not the knife, and it was Ernest who brought it to me. "How came you to have the knife," said I, "when Fritz got here before you?" "The thing is simple," answered Ernest. "In going, he could not long keep up the pace he started with, and soon stopped to breathe, while I ran on and got the knife. But in coming back, Fritz had learned a lesson. He pressed his arms against his sides and held his mouth shut, as he had seen me do, and then the victory depended upon our relative strength. Fritz is 16, while I am but 13, and of course he arrived first." I praised the 2 boys for their skill and declared Ernest conqueror. But now Jack, mounted on his buffalo, demanded that the equestrian exercises should commence, and he be allowed to repair the injury his reputation had sustained. To the saddle, my lads," he bellowed with all his force, "and you shall then see who can best manage a courser. We shall then know whether you can sit on your horse as well as you can exercise your legs." I hastened to comply with the request of the little braggart. Fritz mounted his onagra, and Ernest took the ass, but although they tried all their skill, Jack distanced them both. I was frightened myself to see with what boldness the boy abandoned himself to the powerful animal that bore him. To stop, charge, and turn was but a trifle to him. A practiced groom could not have managed a thoroughbred horse with more ease and grace than he did his bull. Just as I had declared the contest over, and was about to proclaim Jack victor, the little Francis rode into the arena mounted on his young bull, Brome, who was not more than 3 or 4 months old. My wife had made him a saddle of kangaroo skin with stirrups adjusted to his little legs, and there he sat, a whip in his right hand and the bridle of his animal in the left. "Gentlemen," said the little cavalier, saluting us with a gracious bend, "I have not contended with you thus far in any of the exercises of the day. Will you now permit Milo of Crotona to make a trial of his horsemanship before you?" The assembly loudly applauded this little harangue, and the little cavalier commenced to maneuver his courser. The boy was more cool and calm than those of his age are apt to be, but what I admired most was the docility of the animal. My wife looked on with maternal pride to see the success of her dear pupil, and Francis was unanimously proclaimed an excellent horseman. After the horsemanship, the swimming occupied some time. They also climbed the trees, and after we had finished our gymnastics, I announced that the rewards would now be distributed, and that the crowns would shade the brows of the victors. Everyone hastened to the grotto, which had been lighted up with all the torches we possessed. My wife, as queen of the day, was pompously installed in an elevated seat, decorated with flowers, and I called up the laureates to receive the rewards, which their mother distributed to each one as she impressed a tender kiss upon his forehead. Fritz, conqueror at shooting and swimming, received a superb English rifle and a hunting knife, for which he had long wished for. These articles were a portion of the property brought from the wreck. Ernest had the reward for the race of a splendid gold watch. Jack, the cavalier, obtained a magnificent pair of steel spurs and a whip of whalebone. Little Francis received a pair of stirrups and a box of colors as a reward for the industry he had displayed in educating his bull. When the distribution was finished, I rose and, turning to my wife, presented her with a beautiful English workbox in which was contained all those little things that add so much to the comfort of an industrious woman, such as pins, needles, scissors, etc. Receive, said I, my excellent companion, also a reward for your services and endurance during the year, well-deserved one, even though the tender love of myself and children may be in itself a sufficient reward. The day was finished as it had begun, with songs and expressions of joy. We were all happy, all contented. We all enjoyed that pure felicity which a life free from reproach had given us, and we all thanked in our hearts the Lord who had been so merciful towards us. And that's the end of chapter 33. Chapter 34, Gourd Plantation, Monkey Root or Ginseng, Bird Snares. We all remembered the bountiful provision we had derived from the blackbirds and ortolans that had settled upon our giant tree at Falcon's Nest the preceding year. The time had now arrived for their reappearance, and we resolved to leave the grotto, which had become our established residence, and remove nearer to the spot where I intended to secure as many as possible of this delicious provision for the coming winter. The provision of India rubber which he had collected on our last excursion was exhausted. We had made waterproof boots of it, and before I set out I wished to give them a new coat of it. I sent Fritz and Jack to the wood of India rubber trees, where I thought they would find ready drawn a sufficient quantity of the gum, as we had made large incisions in the trees and placed calabashes under them to receive it. And as experience had taught us that the sun hardens it immediately, we had protected our calabashes from its rays by surrounding them with green branches. Our two messengers were lost to our view when my wife suddenly exclaimed, "Stupid woman that I am! I have forgotten to give the boys a calabash in which they might put the gum, for they cannot bring it home in the flat dishes we put there. I mean to go directly and see whether my gourds are ripe." I tranquilized my good wife by assuring her that they would not be at a loss to find something, and then, returning to the last words she had spoken, asked her what she meant by saying, "my gourds." She then informed me that she possessed a superb plantation of gourds, the seeds of which she had found among our European grains, and which she had planted in her kitchen garden. She led the way there, and we found, among many other plants, a quantity of those bottle-shaped gourds that the peasants in our country carry to the field. Some were ripe, some just formed, and others in full bloom. We selected the ripest, and those the form of which could be useful to us, and we commenced to empty them out. We made bottles and plates and saucers, using alternately the knife and the saw. But Ernest, my aide and companion, had very little taste for such work, and he could scarcely contain his joy when he heard me say that we had done enough. We now anxiously expected our young messengers back, for the sun had already begun to decline. Ernest kept a good lookout on the side his brothers were expected from, and he soon perceived them rapidly approaching, the one mounted on the onagra and the other on the buffalo. "Well," said I, "have you made out well?" "Oh, yes, very well," said Fritz in a singular tone, as they leaped from their coursers and showed us what they had brought, which consisted of a root of anise that Jack had brought in his buffalo pouch, a root wrapped...
What's anise?
It's a spice. A root wrapped up in leaves, which they called monkey root, 2 calabashes of India rubber, and another half full of turpentine, a sack full of waxberries, and a crane which Fritz's eagle had killed. But while they were exhibiting their treasures, they talked so fast and so rambling that I was obliged to make them preserve a little order in their recital. Jack then commenced telling us how he had obtained the anise and the turpentine. Of these 2 things, one was at least superfluous, but the other might be of some advantage, as I could use it instead of oil in making my snares for the birds. I then asked them concerning the monkey root they had brought. Fritz answered as follows: "I do not know of what importance this root may be to us, but I can assure you that it far surpasses manioc both in smell and savor. We discovered it close by the farmhouse, where a company of monkeys were regaling themselves on it. You would have laughed to see the manner in which the ugly animals pulled out the roots. They made use of a process which the laborers of Europe had no idea of. They pulled them up by turning somersets." "By turning somersets?" cried we. "Why, how wonderful!" "Yes, somersets," replied Fritz. "Every monkey, after having buried his teeth as far as possible in the root, turns himself violently over backward and repeats the exercise until his reiterated efforts have drawn the precious root from the ground." The monkey root, or ginseng, made its appearance at supper, and was pronounced excellent. But as its aromatic nature made it more of a medicine than an article of food, I forbade its frequent use, while I enjoined my wife to plant a few roots in our garden. The next morning, I took a certain quantity of the liquid India rubber, which I mixed with the turpentine, and placed the mixture over the fire, and while the glue was thickening, I sent the boys into the copse to gather a quantity of little twigs which I needed. They soon brought me a large quantity, which I made them dip in the glue and fasten to the branches of the fig trees, the fruit of which I observed was very much liked by the ortolans, thrushes, and beccafigos. An ortolan is not unlike a yellowhammer, and a beccafigo, or a fig eater, is about the size of a linnet. Both these birds feed on fruits and berries and are much prized for the delicacy of their flesh. A very large trade is carried on from the island of Cyprus with the former.
What's the former?
The one before. I discovered that we had but seen the last of the season of preceding year, as at present the birds were so numerous that a blind man firing into the tree could not have failed to bring down a large number of them. The abundance of game suggested another idea to my mind. I thought that if the ortolans were so numerous during the day, they would not be less so at night, and I resolved to try an imitation of the Americans in Virginia, the experiment of a hunt with torches, persuaded that it would be more expeditious and successful than taking the birds by snares. But my boys, while employed at making the snares, had been taken in their own trap. Hands, faces, and clothes were all covered with glue, and one could not touch them without getting besmeared. They were all in great consternation, and their good mother also, for she had but very little clean linen to spare them. I calmed their fears by assuring them that some ashes and water would remedy all the disorder and wash out all the stains. I rallied them a little on their awkwardness. I knew very well, said I, that my glue would trap the birds, but I had no idea it would catch little boys. I then taught them how to avoid the inconveniences of gluing their fingers by plunging a packet of 5 or 6 twigs by the aid of a pair of pincers into the glue instead of dipping them in singly. They adopted the plan, which succeeded perfectly. When I had made a sufficient quantity, Jack and Fritz climbed into the tree and placed the branches of fig trees covered with the snares among the limbs of the trees, and it was not long before we saw the unfortunate ortolans falling to the ground in numbers, their legs and wings stuck fast in the glue. But although the fowling was so abundant, the labor was very fatiguing, for the branches to which Fritz and Jack had to climb were as much as 60 or 70 feet from the ground. I placed a great deal of confidence in my torches, and I arranged the materials for making them, in which turpentine was a powerful auxiliary. While I was thus occupied, Jack brought me a beautiful bird, much larger than an ortolan, which had been taken in the snare. I am very certain, said Ernest, who had approached, and who with his observing eye had already recognized the bird, I am very sure that it is one of our European pigeons, one of the young ones from those who built their nests last year in the branches of the tree. I took the bird from Jack's hand and recognized with pleasure that Ernest's conjecture was true. I rubbed the ends of his wings and his feet with ashes to clean them from the glue, and I put him in a cage with the intention of adding a dovecot to our domestic property. We captured others, and at night we had in our possession 2 fine pairs of wood pigeons. But notwithstanding our hard labor during the day, we were not able to fill more than 1 barrel. I enjoined my sons to take notice of the trees on which the ortolans roosted during the night. The bark of 2 or 3 of the fig trees, which were covered with the excrements of the birds, decided the matter, and after supper and a few minutes of rest, I commenced my preparations. These were few in number and consisted of 2 or 3 long bamboo canes, 2 bags, torches of resin, and some sugar canes. Fritz, my grand huntsman, regarded me with a look of incredulity. He could not understand how, with these strange instruments, I could realize the prodigies I prophesied. We set out, and the night, which succeeds immediately to the day in these climates, soon overshadowed the earth. Arrived at the foot of the trees that we had chosen, I lighted up my torches, and scarcely had the flame begun to burn than a cloud of ortolans fell down around us and began to fly wildly around the flickering flames. "Well, gentlemen," said I to my sons, "you see that my stratagem has proved not to be a bad idea. Now is your time. I have placed the game within your reach. You have but to extend your hand, and you are masters." I then armed each one with a bamboo cane and set them an example by striking right and left among the mass of ortolans. They fell as thick and fast as rain, and we soon filled 2 large bags. Our flambeaux, however, would only last long enough to light us back to Falcon's Nest, and as the sacks were too heavy for me to carry alone, we placed them crosswise on the bamboo poles and thus carried them very easily. We arrived safely at Falcon's Nest, and before we retired to the rest, and before we retired to rest, looked over our game and terminated the suffering of those poor birds that had not been killed by the blows. The next day, everyone put his hand to the work of cleaning and preparing our game, a very disagreeable, although necessary task. We filled 2 barrels with ortolans, half roasted, and packed down in butter. And that's the end of chapter 34. Next will be chapter 35, the dovecot and its management. This has been Larry's Library.
Bye. Sorry we can't.